We are EngageMagazine.net, an online group of millennials brought together by a common goal to share truth, apply scripture, and to get involved in our lost and hurting world. EngageMagazine.net hosts discussions that help you apply a biblical worldview to your daily life. EngageMagazine.net.
Welcome to Stacy on the Right with your host, Stacy Washington.
Love is everlasting, love is only kind, love is always patient, love will blow your mind.
From the North Lawn of the White House, good morning to you, Kellyanne.
Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Okay, so there are a million people speculating why Hope Hicks left. Was it the Rob Porter thing? Was it the white lies thing? She couldn't take the heat. Why'd she leave?
This is very simple. Hope's been doing this for 3 years nonstop, and I think the president spoke for all of us who have had the privilege and pleasure of working closely with Hope and getting to know her as a friend, that she's fantastic and she has done a tremendous job for him, and as the president says, will probably be back in his orbit at some time and someday to help yet again. But she, Hope is somebody, as communications director, what most people don't understand, to be effective at that job, and she's been enormously effective at that job, you have to really understand the underlying policies here. She shepherded a lot of resources and surrogates, and indeed the president's voice himself, when it came to passing major initiatives like tax reform, working on infrastructure now, holding forth at some of these roundtables yesterday on school safety. Yet last week's listening session with those affected by school shootings was Hope's original idea. And that's one example of many I can give you on how she very quietly but very assiduously has worked behind the scenes to make a real impact for the president, the presidency, and really for her country.
Kellyanne, she's going to be very hard to replace, and I'm wondering, have you thought about it, or have they offered you to take that job?
I've been offered that job many times, no, I work on policy here at the White House, and you're right, it's going to be very difficult to replace Hope Hicks in the Hope role, which was a very multidimensional role over the course of 3 years. But I think it's important to talk about those 3 years. We've been here for 13 months, but Hope is one of those unbroken threads between the early days of the primary campaign, all through the campaign, on the plane, practically every day, including on weekends, with candidate Trump, during transition with him and with us, and certainly here since day one of the administration. And Hope's a New Yorker. She wants to go. She's got a great family she's close to, and she has a wonderful future, and we're all excited to see.
Hey, welcome to Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk and American Family Radio. It's so good to be with you guys. I am just like so much news just streaming on down the line, and we get to unpack it all here. So today on the program, we just heard Kellyanne Conway telling all on Hope Hicks, sharing how integral her role was at the White House. And what's interesting about that is I've read some background pieces on Hope Hicks. And of course, I remember her from The Apprentice. Y'all know, me and my husband used to watch The Apprentice once a week. That was our one night a week where we didn't have stuff going on because our kids were super, super small and super close together. And we would be ripping and running until just before the show because we would be getting them in bed, reading their stories, doing their little exercises and their little fun math games, and then off to bed with them with the Bible scripture. And we would then get we were eating poppycock back then. You know that caramel popcorn? It is so sugary and sweet. I can't even eat it now that I've gone off the sugar. But it was an amazing thing. Probably contributed to. Well, we just won't talk about that. But it was delicious, and so we would eat that. And my husband always have ice cream with it, and we would watch The Apprentice. And so I remember Hope Hicks from back then. So this woman has been in the Trump orbit for years and years and years, but specifically and most importantly, the last 3 years. Since the beginning of the campaign, the primary specifically. And what I didn't know is she acted as the conduit for direct access by reporters to the president. So Jesse Waters said that Hope Hicks was who he would call when he wanted to have an interview with the president, when he wanted to talk to him. And people have actually admitted that when their phone rang and it was Hope Hicks' cell phone, they would answer and it would be President Trump. So she had that kind of ability to connect people to the president that really no one else in the White House had. And as comms director in her most recent role since August of 2017, she was able to do that And she maintained the open lines of communications because the president is naturally pretty reticent to deal directly with the press. The press are usually not very friendly to him. And she advocated for him to continue to keep the lines of communication open and to be accessible. So there may be changes now that someone else will have to take that role. There are obviously going to be changes because whenever there is a transition from one person in a position of leadership to another, there are a lot of adjustments that have to be made. And so it's great that she gets to move on. I saw another piece that I'm not sure if I trust it as much, but I did see it online. Someone said, when a DC lobbying firm offers you $750,000 a year to do a regular job where you're not front facing in the public and hated by half the country, you take it. So I've heard some other people on radio say, you know, who is Hope Hicks? Why is this important? Why is the media making such a big deal out of it? I think just because she's a comms director, she was recently named to that post, and this will be the fourth person to leave that position. And the presidency is a year and you know, a month old. So I do understand the interest in some ways, but in other ways, it seems like, yeah, let's talk about Hope Hicks because she's 27 and beautiful and works for Donald Trump and is in the inner circle. And he's even said she'll work with him again. He fully expects to work with her again at some point in the future. And so, you know, let's focus on her and look at all the pictures of her when she was a child and she used to model on magazine covers instead of talking about, I mean, just a number of breaking news stories that are going on. And one of those is the president's comments at the listening session yesterday, where he kind of said he didn't really care about due process as much as some of the rest of us do. Constitutionally limited government, you know, someone who respects the Constitution, you should be kind of flabbergasted that he would say, well, you know, suspend due process, deal with that after you've taken the guns. We don't have to do that to keep people safe. That's the beauty of the Constitution. So I want to talk about that, but first I want to do our encouragement. So first the guests, okay? Lauren Zelt, Republican strategist and former press secretary for Senator Kelly Ayotte, will be joining the program in the next segment. And then we're going to listen to some audio from Staff Sergeant Alonzo Lunsford. That's in the last segment of this first hour. We'll be listening to him. He's one of the survivors of the attack by Major Hassan. Remember the one he went in and yelled Allahu Akbar and shot up his office place? He was an active duty service member and they all knew he was off, but there was nothing they could do about it. So he went onto Fox News and did an interview to discuss this. He was actually talking to Brian Kilmeade, I believe. And this is a fascinating kind of insider account of how, and I know this for a fact because this was the law when I was on active duty. The only people on base who have sidearms, who are armed, are the military police. And so you actually, the base is very safe. There's a lot of security to keep people, you know, ne'er-do-wells from getting on the base, and they search your vehicle before you come on and all that. And you have to have access. You have to have a green or pink ID card to get on. But what about people who work on the base who have problems? Because that's what happened here. Major Hassan he was employed by the United States. I believe it was the Army, wasn't he? He was an Army man. So he belonged there. He had access, and he went in and shot up his coworkers and killed them. I mean, wounded a ton of them, pregnant women. I mean, it was just, it was a total massacre, and it could have been prevented. So President Trump has raised the specter of eliminating that rule, if you will, and bringing some parity back to us where, you know, on military bases where people are supposed to be operationally prepared and effective at their jobs and ready to wage war in support and defense of the Constitution of the United States. Just because you're in the homeland doesn't mean you should be completely neutered. And that's what's happened here. So what we're interested in seeing and doing right now is all of the proposals that the president has brought up, not just focusing on something he said that I quite honestly disagree with. And I'm on the record on 2 programs on NRA TV now, on, you know, Twitter and on this program in 18 states across the country. I'm against jumping the gun and letting our feelings drive the conversation and suspending due process laws and rights to get safety. Okay. There are other things we can do that are much more effective than suspending due process rights. So we'll get into that. But right now I want to talk about the encouragement. And I feel like we all need this. A lot of times what I'm finding is that when I find a scripture or I feel like, oh, I'm going to share this on the show, it's ministering to me just as much as I hope you're getting something out of it. And so I hope when you hear these, you're thinking, oh, that's refreshing. And I'm receiving that as a part of what we do here on the show, but also as a way for us to kind of balance out what we're doing, because there's so much negative information with, with the news. The news just tends to be all the bad stuff. And so, it's good to have the encouragement. And today's encouragement is from Psalm 91, verses 7 through 8. I'm reading from the ESV. And it says, 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. You will only look with your eyes and see the recompense of the wicked. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. And the it is death, mayhem, destruction, etc., etc. You will only look with your eyes and see the recompense of the wicked. And so you will see the wicked receive their recompense. Now, this is one of those scriptures where people who aren't Christians hear that and they're like, oh, so you're going to be protected, but anyone who's wicked is going to get their recompense. Well, yeah. So the Bible is true. And it's true whether it offends us, whether we agree with it, whether we, in any case, it's true. I liken it to a person who looks outside and they look up at the sky. And obviously we all see color differently, but we do have some accepted norms for what colors are. And you would say the sky is blue. It's light blue. And some parts of it are white, but those are the clouds. So it's blue, right? In the daytime. And so if someone came to you and said, no, the sky is red, you would say it's blue. And if they maintained that the sky was red or any other color and they refused to agree with you that the sky was blue, that wouldn't change the fact that the sky was blue. It would just mean that their interpretation or their view of it is incorrect. And they can hold that view all they want, but they're going to be wrong, right? They're going to be wrong the whole time. And most people are going to just basically, they just don't know what color the sky is. They're incorrect on that. And they're going to move on. And so the Bible is like that. Like most absolute truths, the Bible is, that's what it is. It is what it is. And when we hear 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you, God is offering you the assurance that he's already told you he works all things out for the good of those who are called and love him according to, and are called according to his purpose. You love God and you're called according to his purposes. So he also gives us this in Psalm. You will only look with your eyes and see the recompense of the wicked. So it's an encouragement for us. First of all, don't be wicked. Second of all, you can look around you and see where people are reaping some of what they've sown. And sometimes the people who are nearby are reaping also because they're in the midst of the wicked. A couple of places where we can see that really playing out quite dramatically, the state of California. Their allegiance to illegal immigration has caused great harm to the state of California, environmentally, economically, but most importantly, their safety, which was in peril before, but is now completely, it's a loss. They have a complete loss of safety there. They also have a lot of lawlessness, and they have an imbalance in all of the things that should be in balance, like their budgeting, their school systems. So sure, there are plenty of places where a lot of money and wealth insulates people from the direct recompense of the wickedness of the leadership in California. But for most people, because most of the people in California are not wealthy, we hear all about the wealthy Californians because they're in Hollywood and Silicon Valley. They're able to insulate themselves. Their wealth protects them. But the ones who aren't wealthy are experiencing the full onslaught of mass illegal immigration, mass flouting of federal and local law, their allegiance to abortion, their allegiance to Planned Parenthood, their allegiance to the leftist ideology that flies in the face of the Bible and what it says about how we are to live, what our morals are supposed to be, who we are to worship, the priorities that we're supposed to lay out for ourselves. Illinois is the same way. 645,000 people have left the state of Illinois to live someplace else, running away from the high taxation, the outrageous crime, and the overall it's been corruption for so many years. And now they have someone in office, they have a few people in office who they aren't corrupt, but the government itself there is very corrupt. And there's just no escaping it if you're in Illinois. If you live downstate Illinois, and I have friends who do live in downstate Illinois, just over the river from St. Louis, and they're Christians, they have clean living, but they still have to pay the high taxes. And so, You might think to yourself, well, Stacy, high taxes isn't in and of itself recompense. Well, I think it is, because high taxes make it harder for you to pay your tithes and to give and to minister to others in your community. So we should have the assurance and feel comforted to know that God says these things will not come near us, but there are some conditions there. We have to be obedient. We have to put him first. And when we do that, we have this assurance that he will protect us and keep us safe. And so that's really encouraging. All right, when we get back, we're going to have Lauren Zelt, Republican strategist, with us here on Stacy on the Right. Stay there.
Preborn is saving babies' lives.
My name is Omaris, and I was 19 when I found out I was pregnant. I felt that if I brought a child to this planet, that I could not take care of it, and I could not be mentally prepared to handle everything that comes with having a child. So I thought my best option was to have an abortion. And once I came to have my ultrasound and I heard his heartbeat, I could not have an abortion.
The Ministry of Preborn saves babies' lives through ultrasounds. When a mother hears her baby's heartbeat on an ultrasound, she'll choose life 80% of the time. To donate and provide for a free ultrasound to help save a baby's life, go to preborn.com or dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby. That's pound 250 and say baby. All gifts are tax deductible. Your love can save a life.
Hi, I'm Crawford Loritz with a Legacy Moment. Isn't it wonderful to know that God often surrounds us with people whose hearts are linked to ours? For almost 30 years, Karen and I had the privilege of being part of the staff of Campus Crusade for Christ. That organization is committed to the fulfillment of the Great Commission. This is a cause that captured our hearts. We've given our lives to the fulfillment of this mission. We're not alone. God has given us friends, partners in ministry who share our commitment to the cause. God intended ministry to be a partnership, an alliance. He never intended for us to go it alone, to be the Lone Rangers, all out there doing our own thing. No, we need the synergy and balance others bring. I love what the Apostle Paul says in Philippians chapter 1, verses 3 through 5. I thank my God in all my remembrance of you, always offering prayer with joy in my every prayer for you all, because of your participation in the gospel from the very first day until now. Here is Paul, who's in prison for preaching the gospel. He's separated from his brothers and sisters there in Philippi, and yet he pours out his heart to God and tells them, you know, when I think about you, I'm reminded that I am not alone. Even while you're there and I'm here, I know you are praying for me. I don't care how strong you are or how independent you may be. You and I need to stand with other people, and they need to stand with us. We need each other. We need to encourage one another. Well, here's what I want you to remember today. God does not want you to be discouraged or burnt out. He's provided you with fellow soldiers to hold you up. Identify with them and stay connected.
More information about the ministry of Crawford Loritz can be found online at livingalegacy.org.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
Hello. How are you guys? I hope you're really enjoying a Thursday. The weather is so fine here in Missouri. It's warm enough to just walk outside without a jacket. Yeah. So if you bought coats at the Nordstrom twice yearly sale, you're not getting to wear those right now. So you might have to just put them up in the plastic for next year. Anyway, those things might happen, but you still might have gotten a good deal. I know I did. Right now, it's my pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. We have Lauren Zelt, Republican strategist and former press secretary for Senator Kelly Ayotte. Hey, Lauren, thanks for coming on today.
Hey, Stacy, thank you so much for having me. And can you send some of that weather to Washington, D.C.? Because it is rainy and gross here.
That's what we had. So we had that. So you should be getting this weather shortly, like next couple days, maybe for the
Okay,
weekend.
good.
Yeah. It seems like we
Good.
get
And
it first and you guys
I realized,
get it.
I've had the honor to join you a couple of times, and I apologize. I didn't realize that you served in our armed services, and I wanted to say thank you for your service. That's awesome. That's really great.
Thank you very much. Yeah, no problem. It was my pleasure to get to be in the Air Force. It was pretty fun. Okay, so let's talk about these tariffs.
1% of America, and people forget that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think some people remember it. It depends on what part of the country you live in. Some parts of our country are they have a military base nearby. They're kind of, aware of the military. In other parts of the country, there's not very much presence. And so it's easy to forget that we have like 1 million service members and about half of them are all over the world. So, so when I saw that Demetrius said we're going to talk about the tariffs, honestly, Lauren, I hadn't even paid attention to that. Everything is the Parkland shooting, the NRA, Hope Hicks left the White House, doom, gloom, and destruction. This woman has, after 3 years, decided she's going to go get another job. And everyone's like, no, the sky is falling. There's actually another big story out today, which is that the president is, I'm not sure if I'm understanding this. He's basically said he's bringing in tariffs.
Yeah, so it's funny that you mentioned Hope Hicks because I actually I did want to comment on that. And I'm shocked about this because normally you don't find things that are favorable to conservatives or Republicans on the Vox website, VOX.
Yep.
But they actually have a story up right now talking about Hope Hicks and about how most of the media is, when they talk about her, they're only, discussing her modeling career, and they're saying that she had no political experience. And they contrasted that with the fact that, some of the people in President Obama's orbit that didn't have political experience were named wunderkinds and, prodigies and things like that. But for Hope Hicks, it's a double standard. And, it's a really interesting story about her and just the fact that, she served the president for 3 years. And I think all these people that, want to have, conspiracy theories and whatever else about why she left the White House. I mean, she served the president for a long time. And campaigns are very, very grueling experiences. So,
Brutal.
I think that, she's done a good job. And the fact that, she was with him for such a long time in a role that was so close to him, that's just being lost, the amount of work that she did. And honestly, the fact that after a campaign, a lot of people just don't even, have the energy to go to the White House. And she's been there and in a very high, an important position for a long time. And of course, but the media does what it does, and nobody's talking about, that or the fact that she helped a candidate that a lot of people didn't think would win. And I just, it's gotten lost. But, what are you going to do?
Well, it's gotten lost, and there's something else that I think people are kind of discounting, which is for her age. And so when I agree with you, there are people who I still don't get that one who now has a Fox News contributorship, Marie Harf. First, I don't get how she was given a job at the State Department, and then she was basically running it. And then she also now is a Fox News contributor, and people give her voice so much weight and gravitas, like her opinion is respected. I have no idea for what. Like, I have no idea why Marie Harf is a Fox News contributor, other than she's attractive. That's the only thing I can think of. And I'm not demeaning her education. I don't know what her background is. I assume she has an education that warranted her, making some job in government. But the comparison is pretty stark. I know what Hope Hicks has been able to accomplish because the president has been relying on her since the campaign days. And she's been highlighted a couple of times. Who is Hope Hicks? She wore like a menswear suit overseas in China. And they were like, she's, cutting a figure in a menswear suit. And I was like, yeah, but what is she doing there? Like, is she supporting the president? So they've been discounting her because of her looks for quite a while. And so I understand the interest in her, but it's not the biggest story of the day. And in the end, after she made it 3 years, everyone's always complaining about how there's so much turnover. She was there for 3 years from the beginning when it was a primary up until now. And she's actually leaving kind of on a high point. In other words, she's not in any trouble. She's not under any indictment or investigation. She did testify before a hearing yesterday, but that's not abnormal for someone in her position. And she's leaving. And apparently there's some very lucrative job offer that's been made to her. And I can't see why she wouldn't take that at 27 years old after basically 3 years of hardcore political operative work. Why wouldn't she take her just due, which is, a cushy job at a firm, making lots of money and not having to travel and not having to be before the podium or anything else like that.
Right. And I think I just wish, we could stop it with this double standard, and especially for conservative or Republican women, they're never going to get a fair shake. And I think that the fact that she happens to be, a very good-looking woman has even worked against her. And I think it's really unfortunate because she's not getting the credit she deserves.
Yeah, well, it's a double-edged sword. They talk mean things about women who are older and, look their age, which men never get that. Men never get hit for looking their age. They always get hit. They're distinguished. They cut a clean figure in a suit. They never get comments on their wrinkles or their paunches or anything like that. Women have to look perennially young, and then if they are young and attractive, they get punished for that. Oh, well, I'm not sure. She's only there because she looks good. And you know what? That could actually be true. I mean, who doesn't like being around pretty people? But it's clear she did more than that because she was on the campaign and she made it into the White House with access, like walking on the colonnade with the president. I saw some video clips of her today that I'd never seen before of her basically moving in and out of all of the inner spaces, the spaces we would all love to just go sit in so we could take notes and know what's going on. And she was there because that was her job. So, I just think it's crazy. I hate that we can't ever get a fair shake because there are so many brilliant women on the Republican side. And you don't have to agree with the policies, but how about just respecting the fact that these women are doing these things? And again, it's the feminists who say the bad things. Well, she looks old. They've been saying some really mean things about some of the women in the White House currently that I really can't believe they've been how that made it onto the air. I will never understand.
No, I'm with you on that. But yeah, no, there's a lot of other stuff going on at the White House today. Actually, as you alluded to earlier, and two important things, I think. Number one, speaking of women at the White House, I saw that the First Lady and that Kellyanne Conway they hosted, I believe it was a summit today to discuss the opioid crisis. And I have to tell you, I really do believe that the president's heart is in the right place on this issue. And, addressing that. And I was very glad to see the continued leadership, especially from the First Lady on this issue, as well as the President. So that, I think, number one, was a really good thing that happened at the White House today. And then number two, I think the President did something very politically savvy today in announcing that he was planning to announce next week some tariffs on aluminum and steel imports from other countries like China. Now, I'll be honest with you, I'm not a trade expert. I'm not an economist either. I think the business community has had, different reactions to this. I think it depends on what part of the business community you're in, whether you're involved in importing or exporting, how this would affect you. But all of that aside, I think that politically this was a very smart thing that the president announced because if you look at, this week he's announced his reelection campaign. He's named his campaign manager. And he is going to need to do well again in 2020 in a lot of those Rust Belt states, so the Pennsylvanias, the Michigans of the world, that really propelled him over the top in 2016. Mm-hmm. And I think with this announcement about the tariffs, what he can say is he can go to Pennsylvania. I happen to be from Pittsburgh, and my dad works in a company that is still involved in the steel industry, so this is something super close to my heart. And he will be able to go and say to those folks, look, I'm actually doing things and working hard to make good on my promise that I was going to try to bring jobs back. Because ultimately, I think that's the point of this announcement, is to try to help stem the tide of some of the the manufacturing jobs and things involving the steel industry that really, the Rust Belt, they saw all of those jobs decimated. I mean, it happened in my hometown of Pittsburgh, happened in a lot of other places. And, so the president, I think, made good today on the campaign promise. I know that there are a lot of Republican senators that are against this. I haven't really seen where the business community lands. But politically, I think it was a very savvy move, and I do hope that it's something that could help those people, in the Rust Belt and other places where they've seen, a lot of the industries really decimated.
So how, I know there's a big argument on the right about whether or not tariffs are smart. Donald Trump's a businessman. He has actually dealt in a lot of these kind of import-export type things because of the industry that he's in. He was in real estate and then other kind of retail type businesses where he wholesaled and then retailed things. Is there a way to make tariffs an effective tool to shift the way that American businesses are doing their jobs, or is this just a boondoggle that's going to result in job loss? Like I'm kind of on the fence because I hate to think of it as it's only bad, because I don't think that's the truth, but there may be some unintended consequences, I suppose.
Yeah, well, I think one of the unintended consequences of this could be the fact that it's possible that you could see a rise in consumer goods out of this, which would be a negative response. I know Senator Pat Toomey, who represents Pennsylvania, one of the things that he said that it could be very bad for consumers and that it could raise costs on some products. And so I think that's one issue to look at. Like you, I'm not entirely sure where to land on, the tariff item. I'm not an economist. I'll leave that to others. But, I don't think it was a coincidence that the week that he announced that he was going to be running for re-election that he decided to make this announcement. Because really it will give him that, for better or for worse, I'm a political consultant, and in, the industry that I'm in, it's a talking point that he can go and say, look, I have, tried to implement policies that are going to bring jobs back from all places of China. Think about during the campaign in 2016, in a lot of these places, he really was talking about how a lot of these jobs were lost to China, and it's true. And so I think that this is something that, I'm not entirely sure of how it'll pan out, and it could be that, he faces backlash on the Hill and decides not to do it. But what I liked seeing out of the president was that I liked that he's got sort of his vision on what he needs to do to both, do the best job as he can as president, bring jobs here, back to America, away from overseas, bring them back home, and see that he's already thinking about his reelection. I know that there's a lot of people, on the right in some conservative circles. Some people like Trump, some people don't. But I think we can all agree that he, is much better on many, many, many accounts than, a Hillary Clinton would have been, or Kamala Harris, or whomever the Dems choose to run in 2020. So I was heartened to see that he's already kind of making these calculated choices that I think will benefit him well later.
I agree. I hate it when, as soon as he brings up a proposal, or especially something that we've had plenty of time to kind of look into. I know we've been busy because we've been, fighting the Democrats, kind of fighting amongst ourselves on the Republican side and all that. But it seems like we would have had the Heritage Foundation or someone huge come out with a big white paper on how the president's plan to try to use tariffs to make changes to American manufacturing could be good, or, you know what I mean? Like, it feels like it's kind of discombobulated. And I understand the strategy behind it. It's smart to, first of all, announce your reelection campaign before the midterm, so people, because there's been a lot of talk on the left. He's not going to run again. He hates being the president. And whenever I hear that, I'm like, have you even thought that through for 5 seconds? Who would hate being the president of the United States? Who would first run and spend all of their own personal capital, their personal, like he was kind of popular before, just throw all of that away to become president and then decide after you get there, I don't like this. Yeah, there's probably a lot about it he doesn't enjoy, but I can't see him saying, one term's enough. They keep saying, we're not even sure if President Trump's going to run again. I'm like, really? You don't think he's going to run? We think John Kasich has a chance. Really? You think John Kasich has a chance at unseating the president in a primary when he's sitting in the White House and John Kasich is, what is he doing again? I don't even know what he's doing. So I think it's a bunch of malarkey that people are peddling, that he doesn't want to run. And this kind of puts all of that to rest and helps, I guess, clear the slate for 2018 midterms. I mean, I'm just trying to kind of strategize the way he must be thinking. I got to get all of that talk tamped down so we can really focus on supporting these candidates.
Yeah, well, I was working in New Hampshire in 2016, and John Kasich spent a lot of time in New Hampshire. I guess he could do well there. I don't know, but I know the president won the New Hampshire primary, so there you go. But it was interesting to me that you mentioned that, people talk about, discord on the Republican side and in, conservative circles. It's worse over on the Democratic side. I mean, say what you will about conservatives, about the Republican Party, but at least, we're always very transparent. I think we have to be because of the way the mainstream media, sort of really puts us under a microscope all the time. But if you look over on the Democratic side, I mean, the DNC is in complete disarray. I think that the Democratic Party has two different, ideas of what directions they want to go. Are they going to, go more towards Bernie's side or, of socialism, or are they going to go, more of a more proper traditional Democratic stance? I don't know. Fundraising is a disaster on the Democratic side. So, people can say all that they want about discord, on the Republican side of the aisle, but it is far worse. I mean, I got to tell you what, I would not want to be Tom Perez right now. I would not, because things are just not going well on that side, and I would not want that job.
Well, Lauren, I agree with you, and I think the other reason you wouldn't want to be Tom Perez is because he doesn't seem to be able to utter a sentence without cursing, and you seem to be able to communicate quite effectively without, without using curse words. You actually communicate beautifully, and I haven't heard you curse ever, so it's pretty awesome. Thank you so much for joining the show. I love it when we get a chance to talk. Have a great day, and I hope you're getting our weather and by the weekend. And we'll be right back with more Stacy on the Right after this.
What does it take to live an uncommon life? Here's former Super Bowl winning coach Tony Dungy with today's uncommon moment.
Too often I hear people say that they will make a difference later, once they've accomplished more, once they have more free time, once the kids are grown and gone. Don't let your age, your experience, or the call of success get in the way of your mission to touch the world for good. You're in a unique place that no one else occupies. Your family, your friends, and your workplace are all spheres of influence. Mentor leaders don't wait. They look for opportunities to get involved in the lives of people. If you pursue mentor leadership, God will ultimately use you for His good. Every platform you have is important in God's eyes.
Tony Dungy, author of the popular Uncommon book series. Discover more at CoachDungy.com. That's CoachDungy.com.
My name is Kayla, and I'm 16. I was already snorting cocaine with my family by the time I was only 8 years old. But when I came to Teen Challenge, everything changed. Now that I'm drug-free, I've started seeing possibilities for myself I never would have dreamed of.
If you know an adult or teenager who's struggling with a chemical addiction, Teen Challenge can help. Call us today at 417-581-2181 or reach us online at teenchallengeusa.com. This is Urban Family Talk.
When I hear the president saying, you just have to respect the flag, well, you kind of don't.
Stacy Washington.
So I respect the symbols of this nation. I would never burn a flag. I do believe that they're not sacred, but they are important to us in our national identity. He could say, I feel like I have to respect it, or I feel like I don't respect people who don't respect it. But to say that you have to is not exactly accurate.
Stacy on the Right. Weekday afternoons at 2 Central on Urban Family Talk.
We live in a day when America's families are under attack like never before.
Buddy Smith, Senior Vice President of the American Family Association.
The war against biblical principles rages on numerous fronts. The internet, Hollywood, Washington, D.C., America's corporate boardrooms, and the list goes on. At American Family Association, we're committed to standing against the enemies of God, the enemies of your family. And we recognize it's an impossible task without God's favor and your partnership. Thank you for being faithful to pray for this ministry, to give financially, and to respond to our calls for activism. What you do on the home front is crucial to what we do on the battlefront. We praise God for your faithfulness. And may He give us many victories in the battles ahead as we work together to restore our nation's biblical foundations.
This is Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
I'm looking to get rid of gun-free zones in the military. We had 5 incredible soldiers, 3 of whom were championship shooters, that were nowhere near their gun, and this whack job walked in and killed all of them. And they were defenseless, and if they had their guns, he would have been gone in a second.
And the president was talking about Fort Hood, and in Fort Hood there was actually 12 killed in 2009, and that's another mass shooting. And in 2014 there were 3 people killed and 16 others injured. And believe it or not, on our military bases, gun-free zones. Retired U.S. Army Staff Sergeant Alonzo Lunsford survived the shooting in 2009. And I wanted to get your perspective, Sergeant, if it's possible, when the president said that, and we just played that, what are your thoughts? If you had a gun that day, what would have happened?
If I would have had a gun on November 5th, 2009, Major League Sign, we wouldn't have had 14 KIA or 32 wounded in action. I would have put 2 to the chest and 1 to the head because I was at the front when the shooting started.
Right. It would all have been instinct. You're actually trained to do this, right?
Absolutely.
Right. So your thoughts about the president not making the military bases gun-free zones?
Well, I think that's a good decision because it used to be where all NCOs were required to carry a sidearm on them while they were on duty. And, I mean, think about it. We're trained to use weapons in combat. Then NCOs and above should be trained to carry the weapons on post because you don't never know how someone can infiltrate our bases and cause chaos.
Okay. Did you hear what he said? See, that's his training talking right there. When he said he would have put 2 to the chest and 1 to the head, that's his training talking. And he was fully trained and he would have been able to stop the shooter from shooting as many people, but he was disarmed. So when you have laws that disarm the ones who are trained, they're going to pay attention to that because they like their freedom. A criminal who's bent on mayhem, who's planning on killing themselves or knows they're going to go to jail, they're not going to pay attention to the law. They're going to go ahead and do whatever they're planning on doing because they know everyone else is abiding by the law. Now, if everyone's got a sidearm or most people are armed or everyone who's met their training minimums is armed, then you know when I go in there, I'm only going to have so many seconds before I'm put down. And that is a deterrent. It's a deterrent for deranged individuals as well. If it wasn't, then you would see deranged individuals go and shoot up police stations. But why don't they do that? I mean, if we have to go down to the most basic kindergarten level of logic and ask those kinds of questions, yes, it calls all of the things that we know about our highly educated society into stark relief. But let's just indulge this question for 1 second here on the Stacy on the Right show. Why don't mass shooters go shoot up police departments or gun ranges? Because they know before they get the third shot off, they're on the floor. Because people who are highly trained will unholster and unload. That is why. So that's why you see people who you would think are not going to advocate for that. You see somebody with a permanent tan like myself, who's a woman advocating for more guns, not less. And you're like, well, she must hate herself. No, I understand the dynamic. Even deranged lunatics know that shooting into a barrel where you're not going to get any kind of pushback is easier and you get much more recognition among the other crazies. Look how many people they were able to kill. He was able to kill this many people because he went in and he knew their procedures because he'd been to school there. He walked in dressed like this or that, and then he went upstairs after he sprayed into these many classrooms. Then he went upstairs. This is what the crazies are going to be talking about online about Nicholas Cruz, rehashing over and over and over again all the details of his deranged lunatic behavior, killing his former classmates and teachers because he knew that nobody was going to shoot back. He was able to walk out with the students as they evacuated as if he was a student and then go to 2 fast food joints, like a Dairy Queen and then over to a McDonald's. He was actually, I guess he thought, well, I'm hungry now. I done killed some folk. I'm hungry. And he went on and got himself something to eat before he was arrested. And now he's running around getting fed and clothed and showering and doing everything on our dime. Yes, I said our dime because we're all taxpayers. Taxpayers of Florida specifically. So if he was really, 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 you know, I mean, if guns weren't a deterrent, then why didn't he decide to go kill a whole bunch of police officers? Or why don't people go into, Cabela's and all these different places that sell firearms, Bass Pro Shops, places like that? Why don't they go in there and shoot those places up? I'll tell you why. Because a lot of undercover FBI work in these stores, overseeing firearms sales and purchases. Because the people who work behind the counter are just as likely to be armed with live weapons as they are to be showing you a weapon that is completely disabled with the little safety thing through it. You can You can play with it all you want to, but you can't get it loaded and you can't shoot with it because it's a display weapon. It works. It's a real gun, but you can't do anything with it until after you've purchased it. And then they're not going to put it in with the ammunition. They're going to put it in its case and sell it to you and walk you out the door. That's why deranged lunatics don't go shoot up places that are full of guns, because they know better. Which kind of calls into question how deranged they are, because they at least know enough to care for themselves. They at least know enough to go into a situation where they have the most killing capacity, where the people that they're going to go and attempt to kill are going to have the least amount of response to them. So if you harden the schools, if you arm some of the teachers, the ones who are actually willing to go get trained and aren't lunatics themselves, if you arm those people, then you have a situation where a school shooter doesn't know, so I don't know how many people in this building are armed. There's no gun-free zone sign on the door. There's no opportunity for me to get in here. I don't know how many minutes I'm going to have. When they call the drill and evacuate the building, if I'm able to get them to do that and I start shooting and someone sees me, I don't know which teacher coming out of which classroom is going to be armed. Once you add that dynamic, you're going to see the incidences of school shootings go down. But you have to be willing to say, in every instance, there is no good reason to have a sign on the door that says there are no guns allowed here, because that sign means open season, lunatics, come on in. That's all this is. So, I hate hearing somebody like this, Staff Sergeant Alonzo Lunsford. When you watch the video, this is a big dude. He's big and he's trained. This is a man who knows his way around firearms. I hate listening to him talk about this because if you're listening, you can still hear it in his voice. He has regret from that day. I guarantee you the man has laid up at night in the wee hours, and he has been very upset that he was unable to stop the carnage that went on. There's nothing worse than knowing what to do, actually having the ability to do something, but not being able to do it because some other nincompoop decided it's just not comfortable when everyone's walking around armed on the base. The base is secure. Why do we need guns on base? And someone else was like, you're right. Let's just not have people carry firearms. It's too much work. We have to do too many checks and stuff. Too much training. Everybody doesn't need to know how to use a gun. The military is beyond that. We're now into technology. We use technology to kill. That's the kind of people who sit around in rooms with, they have an armed guard at the door downstairs. They're in a secure facility with doors. When they lock, you need a key card or something to get in. You can't just stroll in and out of their areas. But for other people who are in open buildings and working with coworkers who are, a little off, as they say, those people should just be disarmed. It's always really convenient. Like the picture I have up on Facebook, on my Facebook page, Stacy on the Right, there's a picture of Ellen DeGeneres and her wife, Portia de Rossi, and they're at a gun control rally. They're marching down the middle of the street, and everyone marching around them are regular people except for two plainclothes security officers. Black glasses, dark suit, tie, pin. You can tell those are security guys because they're not just walking. They're looking, they're strategically placed, so they're looking in different directions. Two more guys with shirts that say security, polo shirt, sky blue, security embroidered on the front. They're strategically placed in between the two plainclothes guys. And then you have two other guys who are actual police officers in between those two. So basically, Portia de Rossi and Ellen DeGeneres are walking holding hands, and they're surrounded by 6 armed security officers or policemen or security detail, private security. And they're advocating, while they're surrounded by guns, that all the rest of us should be disarmed. Thanks, Portia and Ellen, but no thanks. Unless you want to come get the guns up out of this joint. You, Ellen, come without your armed security, come by yourself, ring my doorbell, and you demand the guns. Not your armed security, not Portia. Come by yourself and you ask me to disarm. That's the way it should have to be done. If you want people to disarm, first you disarm and then you go ask everyone else to disarm. But how dare you, from your, multi-million-dollar mega mansion in a gated community behind not just gates, but cameras and snipers and everything else. And you have armed security that patrols your compound. You have a driver who's trained in defensive driving and carries a firearm or a sidearm as well. You have someone who's your personal security detail, who's like a member of your family because he has access to all of your, any place you spend time, your work, your home, your kid's school. He's everywhere you are, and he's there to step in between you and any comer. You have all of that security for yourself because you're that special. But me and my kids, me and my husband, me and Bentley, the conserva pup, we're supposed to just go out, no protection at all? Why do you think you're so much more valuable than I am? Or better yet, forget me, why are you more valuable than the 3 that the Lord gave to me and my husband to take care of? I'll wait. Because I know I'm not going to get an answer. I know you're not going to come ring my door. You're too busy out there using your platform to advocate for disarming law-abiding citizens while you get to keep all of your guns because your guns are paid. So, I don't have to hire guns and have someone paid. I'll go train. I'll go do what I need to do. And my husband as well, and the children as well. And then we will exercise our rights under the Second Amendment and the Castle Doctrine, which we have here in Missouri, and Stand Your Ground, which we have here in Missouri, and the rest of it, sorry, but I'm just not going to be doing what you want us to do. I refuse. So this whole discussion, it's just disgusting to have to sit here and listen to this man who was well-trained and could have stopped this crazy killer, but he wasn't able to do it. But I want you to hear it because this is what the liberals want for all of us. They want us all to be disarmed and at the mercy of any criminally minded person. And if there's anything that should get your blood boiling, and a lot of this stuff does, it should be hearing someone describe what happened to them when they could have stopped it, but they were prevented from doing so because people who know better than he did made decisions that put him in a place where he was a sitting duck. So here he is. He talks about the rest of it. It's Staff Sergeant Alonzo Lunsford, a survivor of the Fort Hood office shooting. Remember, the president refused to call it terrorism. And it's number 3.
Yeah, and we know they've tried. Remember the Fort Dick 6. That's terrorists on the outside, let alone somebody who's on the inside who's gone off the rails. 15 mass shootings at military bases. That's got to be part of the conversation. Now, quickly, like what happened in Florida, this guy Major Hassan who shot you, he shot all these guys and killed, you guys knew he was nuts, right? You knew this guy was a little off-kilter.
Absolutely.
And you couldn't do anything.
That's right, because a lot of times when the powers that be are alerted to the threat, they know it's a threat, but they say it's not a credible threat. In my opinion, any threat is a credible threat until you exhaust all resources to find out if it's a good resource or it's a bad resource or not. And so the shooting in Florida, is sad to say for those families that survived and the ones that are deceased, the ball was dropped. And again, now, instead of us being proactive, we're being reactive. Something has to change.
Right. And one of the things the president said is, if a cop feels as though somebody's mentally unstable or an FBI man or woman, I want them to be able to act, take the guns away, and then we'll worry about due process later. A lot of people went out of their minds on that statement. But knowing what you know now and hearing some of these eyewitnesses say, I told the cops and they said their hands were tied, do you believe the president's onto something, or is it just a violation of the Constitution that's intolerable?
No, I definitely think that he's onto something. And it's something that needs to be looked into deeper and further than just talking about it. We actually need to do our research and then ban the wagon so we can come up with a possible solution.
Yeah, put something together, sunset in 18 months, we go back and visit it and find out what's working. We all have the same objective. Alonzo Lunsford, thanks for your service, thanks for sharing your story, and knows that it's pretty clear the president has not forgot the challenges on military bases.
All right, so I'm just going to say again, just in case you missed the show yesterday or you're just tuning in, first time hearing the show, welcome in. I do not agree with the suspension of due process, taking guns before we know exactly what it is that a person is supposed to have said that they will do. I believe family members can report. I believe the police should act on those things, and we should hold our elected officials and law enforcement accountable for their action or inaction on all of these things. But due process has to be there. That's constitutionally protected. So I disagree with President Trump on that one aspect of his comments yesterday. All right, we'll be back with more after these messages. Stay there for hour 2 of Stacy on the Right.
always stay up to date with the latest in the culture war from the news team of One News Now. Use the One News Now mobile app. It neatly categorizes news and articles from the One News Now website in an easy-to-find format. You can read the stories, watch videos, and conveniently share any news story. It's now available for download from your phone's App Store.
Truth, wisdom, empowerment. Urban Family Talk, a ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh. In an effort to try and revive the nation's steel and aluminum industries, President Donald Trump makes an important announcement. John Decker has more.
President Trump set to place tariffs on steel and aluminum imports next week. The announcement came hours after the president tweeted, "Our steel and aluminum industries have been decimated by decades of unfair trade and bad policy with countries from around the world." He spoke with steel and aluminum executives earlier in the cabinet room.
What they do is they dump massive amounts of product in our country, and it just kills, it destroys our companies and our jobs. And that's been happening for so many years.
The president will institute 25% tariffs on steel and 10% on aluminum for an unlimited period of time. At the White House, John Decker, Fox News.
A former attorney general thinks a new lawsuit against Obamacare has a good shot at winning.
Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton is leading an effort of 17 other attorneys general and 2 governors in suing to have the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare declared unconstitutional. The argument involves the individual mandate penalty or tax that the U.S. Supreme Court upheld in the first case against Obamacare held in 2012. Based on that ruling, former Virginia Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli tells Sandy Rios in the morning on AFR Talk, Paxton and others should win.
The tax reform bill that just went through eliminated that tax penalty as of January 1, 2019. So what Congress has done and the president has signed is eliminate the one hook that the Supreme Court relied upon to hold Obamacare constitutional.
The case was filed Monday in federal court in Fort Worth, Texas.
So now Donald Trump and his administration are being sued because they're in office over Obamacare. And my own view is they ought to simply acknowledge that it's unconstitutional and that it ends on December 31, 2018.
I'm Chris Woodward.
PBS has a reputation for leaning to the left when it comes to its news and public affairs, but the network is hoping a new political talk show will start balancing the scales. More from Steve Jordahl.
PBS says the show called In Principle will start with an initial run of 8 weeks in April, and then executives will decide if it's worth a longer run. It'll feature columnist Michael Gerson and pundit Amy Holmes, and it's designed to have a familiar feel to the PBS audience.
As things now stand, the race for next president of the United States will be between Jimmy Carter, the defender, and Ronald Reagan, the challenger.
We'll kind of see where it goes, if it's going to stand up for conservatism like William F. Buckley did.
That's Curtis Houck of Media Research Center. He says Holmes recently worked for Glenn Beck and MSNBC.
Michael Gerson has been a very firm never-Trump Republican.
And while the network says it wants, in principle, to be conservative-leaning, Houck has his doubts.
This really kind of gives it away and kind of in their release saying that they will discuss race, gun control, and whether conservatism is the right message for the working class. Already, there's a little bit of skepticism in that part of that statement there.
The show will be based in Washington. I'm Steve Jordahl.
Last year's credit reporting agency breach was even larger than first reported. More from Jenny Casola.
Equifax now says its hacking involved an additional 2.4 million Americans. The credit reporting company says the breach was of names and a partial driver's license number. The hackers did not steal Social Security numbers. Equifax is reaching out to all customers whose information was hacked and will provide credit monitoring and theft protection services. This hacking is on top of the 145.5 million accounts already reported hacked. Janico Sola, Fox News.
And the Commerce Department reports that Americans lifted their spending just 0.2% in January, while their incomes jumped because of last year's tax cuts. Incomes rose 0.4%, boosted by $30 billion in tax-related bonuses the government estimates were paid out in January. American Family News is online at onenewsnow.com. I'm Rusty Pugh.
Romans 13:14 says, "Clothe yourselves with the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the desires of the flesh." So what are you clothing yourself with? Whether we realize it or not, what we allow in our temples affects our way of living. We can't feed ourselves junk and expect to hear from the Lord. Clothe yourself with the righteousness of God at urbanfamilytalk.com.
Welcome to Stacy on the Right with your host, Stacy Washington.
Professors Deaton and Case are on a mission to solve a mystery. What's behind the decades-long rise in suicide rates in America? And what does it say about our country?
In every state in prime age, whites' deaths from suicide went up between 1999 and 2016. But we think it's a real sign that something is not right.
The professors note that the suicide rate among middle-aged African Americans isn't on the rise, and it's far lower than that of whites.
Even though whites are wealthier, within an African American community, you feel you are part of a community.
Suicides are striking especially hard in a most unlikely area, one where the myth of America was made.
There's a suicide belt in America right up the Rocky Mountains.
Arizona, New Mexico, all the way up through Montana,
Alaska.
And then if you actually went further into Alaska.
Is that really a thing, a suicide belt?
That's what they call it. Do a colored map of the U.S. showing where suicide rate is higher. It looks like the Rocky Mountain.
Are we talking about despair caused by economic hardship, or is it something in the spirit of America?
I think economics may trigger some of these things, but in the end, it's a failure of spiritual and social life that drives people to suicide.
Okay, welcome back to the show. This is Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. UrbanFamilyTalk.com is the website for Urban, and then for AFR, it's AFR.net. Visit those. You can also tweet me at Stacy on the Right on Twitter and Instagram. Love to interact with you. Even you haters, yeah, y'all get a little bit of love on the show as well. 866-963-2037. Call lines are open, and we do not have a guest this second hour. So if you want to call in and talk about any of the things that we have going on, please reach out. We'd love to speak with you. Agree or disagree. It's always good to talk to the listeners. And I found this piece that we're listening to here at the Wall Street Journal, their website, WSJ.com, why deaths of despair may be a warning sign for America moving upstream. And the two people that you hear talking, actually three people, the interviewer, then you hear these two Princeton economists sharing their provocative theory. And this is one of their recurring storylines, pieces that they do at Wall Street Journal. It's called Moving Upstream. And what's interesting about it, Jason Bellini and Moving Upstream, that you hear his voice in the piece. He's interviewing these people. And what Professor Ann Case, who's and her husband, Nobel Prize-winning economist Angus Deaton, the two of them are saying that deaths of despair are a direct result of capitalism not answering the call for Americans. And so they have this really interesting, there's a diagram on here that shows that just roughly 30% of Americans have, it's actually 40% of white Americans and about 22% of black Americans. But when you add all the different people, so take all Americans, it's roughly 30% of Americans, or a third, have a college education or a bachelor's degree or more. And then you have another 28% who have some college but dropped out. It's over here. And then there's also the remaining people, and that's, another third, and they are people who don't have any college education at all. And what they're positing is that this suicide belt that they've described is a direct result of capitalism's failure to kind of pan out for everyone, that capitalism only provides a good lifestyle for people who have college educations, and everyone else is beginning to realize that their resistance is futile and they're killing themselves. So they go on and they talk about evangelical Christians. Now, I know our audience is widely mixed and varied, and we have people of faith, people of no faith, everybody, you know, who listens to the show. There is no one demographic for listeners, but I find it interesting that these two people who, as I watched the video, it occurred to me that they were more than likely, with their backgrounds and where they're coming from, and they're Princeton and Harvard educated economists and, you know, that whole bit, that they might not be people of faith, but they might be. I don't know. And the interviewer doesn't ask them that. So that's what's so interesting about this. And that's what sometimes when I watch these things, I wish I could just be there and be like, you know, if it were live and you could submit a question, are you people of faith, the two of you? Like, because they're obviously at the tip of the spear for education and wealth attainment and earnings. They're on the older side, you know, so they're in that part of their life where their earnings are peaking, and they're not only earning money, but they're also, their investments are starting to peak, all of that stuff. You know, when you get in your 50s, 60s, 70s, that's when you start your peak. That's your peak earning time. And then after that, it tends to go down a little bit because you stop working as much because now you're elderly. So they're saying it's not just a function of economics that white Americans are killing themselves. They're saying it's a failure of spiritual and social life that drives people to suicide. So they mention the faith walk, but they don't delve into the reality of the Christian worldview, which is that, you know, suicide is a sin, and that you would, if you're living a life of faith and you're struggling, whether it's financially or in your community or what have you, that it's the relationship with Jesus Christ that enables you to bear through that, and you're relying on him to improve that situation, to work it out for your good. They don't talk about that. So I feel as if, even though I watched this thing the whole way through, and let me just look here, it's 10 minutes long, the piece, the video, I feel like they left a whole aspect of the conversation wanting because they didn't touch on it. Now, obviously, I didn't clip all 10 minutes for the show, but I do have two more little snippets of it that I wanted you to get to listen to, because this paints evangelicals in a bad light. I happen to be an evangelical, and I'm not really concerned so much about the reputation, but the leaving off of the most salient point here, which is a faith walk is what enables you to bear up under these kinds of bad circumstances, job losses, et cetera, et cetera. It's the community of faith that you're involved in, your church, that will come alongside you if you're out of work or if something happens, you know, with your family, with health and things like that. They're the ones who kind of, you know, bear up under you and help hold you up and pray with you and all of that. That's what makes life rich and enjoyable. And that's why God encourages us in the Bible, you know, forsake not the gathering together of the saints. He wants us involved, not just in the church by attending, but serving and being a part of that community. So let's listen to them. They talk a little bit about the American suicide belt and where it's located. It's clip 5.
Is it reasonable to think that if some of these people had more money, that they wouldn't fall into the pits of despair?
I don't think anyone doubts that if they had more money, they'd be better off, right? I mean, we're economists after all. But you can't link these deaths to having more money or less money. It just doesn't work.
If you take a look at the data from the Great Recession, you see what they mean. Even though the economy tanked and many Americans lost their savings, it didn't significantly move the suicide trend line.
You used the term deaths of despair. Did you guys coin that?
Yeah.
The addiction thing is so close to suicide. Some of the opioid doctors talk about a lost generation.
Okay, so
one of the things that intrigues the researchers is that it seems to be a North American phenomenon.
This is where the comparison with Europe is very important, because you don't really see deaths of despair.
Though in Southern Europe, you do see really high unemployment, particularly for young people.
We're not talking about unemployment here. It's much more to do with these, things that you would correlate with a spiritual crisis.
The Europeans are not killing themselves the way that the Americans are. They've lost jobs. Technological changes come to Europe. So one of the places our research will go next is, what are the big differences between the Europeans and the Americans, that it's helping the Europeans keep body and soul together.
Okay, so a couple things. First of all, they first kind of move through and they say, more dollars could help. But then they admit just simply having more money does not mean that you will be happy enough not to, commit suicide. they talk about the Europeans. And I just have this is one of the things that I don't understand about highly educated people who come out of academia and they do research and all of that. And they really love to compare Americans to Europeans. Now, I grew up in Germany and I've been to, France, Saudi Arabia, the Netherlands, England, Italy, Spain, all Belgium, Holland. I've been all over there. Russia, back when it was the USSR. I've been to a lot of these countries, and there is a difference between Americans and Europeans. And I don't mean that we're taller and fatter than they are on average. I don't mean that. I don't mean that we're much more brash and much more emotionally obvious, even though those are things that are statistically true. I don't mean just on the surface. I mean, as people, as a people group, Americans are very, very different from Europeans. And it comes from, first of all, we come from a nation up until just recently with the, advent of President Obama and his complete separating of America from our faith moorings. We actually come from a place where we believe the 80% of Americans believe in God. 80%. You do not have those numbers in Europe of people who believe that God exists. That's first of all. Second of all, Americans are much more philanthropic than Europeans are. And there's something called the American spirit. And I know there's some people, especially I've encountered Black people who they're like, that's just white people talk. And that is absolutely not true. It is not a white thing to believe that Americans have a certain spirit about them that is unique to Americans. And it's the same with like Scottish people have a certain thing about them. All different people groups from different countries have a thing about them, but Americans it's a different thing. It's like a thing that sets us apart from other people groups, other nations. And so when they're like, so the Europeans have experienced job losses, yet they're not killing themselves. Well, Europeans commit suicide. That's first of all. They may not be committing suicide at the same rate as Americans, but these economists are missing a key part of this conversation. And so we'll listen to the last bit of audio from them coming in from the next break because we don't have a guest there. So we'll have that audio as we come in. And then I'd love to hear from you what you think about what they've said and what I've been saying about it. I think it's worth us having a conversation about this. And we need to include, so Europe is largely de-churched to the point that, like in Germany, so the church receives a universal payment from the government. So whether or not you attend church, a part of your taxes to the government includes a church tithe that goes to the church that you choose. So you can choose Catholic or Protestant. You can choose, a mosque. You can choose whatever your tax payment to the church goes to. So when government gets involved in the tithing process from people to the church, what it does is people stop going to church because they don't feel like they need to go there, because a key part of people tithing is that they're involved in the church and they see where their money is going. It's obedience to God, but in the real, most people want to see where their money is going. But if it's taken by the government, whether you attend or not, it depresses church attendance. So Europeans are largely unchurched. Doesn't mean there aren't any Christians there. There are, but they are not as churched as Americans. I mean, the differences are so many that I really need a list from some, Christian organization. I've read about it before, but suffice it to say, these economists appear not to have taken that into consideration as they were formulating their research and their analysis from that research that they did about the suicides. A lot of things impact suicide. The reason a person would say, my life isn't worth living anymore. They didn't talk at all about our obsession in America with devaluing life from conception to the end of a pregnancy, 900,000 abortions. We act as if we can do that and the results of that stay inside of one area, but they don't. We now are seeing people, I think in Oregon, they just passed a bill that says that it basically takes out the advance directive. So if your family member is saying this person has dementia, but we don't want them taken off life support, or obviously you still would feed a person, they're being cared for in assisted living. They're saying now they can starve that person to death because they have dementia. That's right here in the U.S. So if you are starving your parent or your grandparent to death because they have dementia and they're not going to realize it, you also will devalue your own life. We can't just devalue the lives of one group and expect everyone else's lives to be valuable. And these are all biblical principles that we used to all know together as one, but they're being lost as we become more secular and get further and further away from God. These economists don't discuss that. So you guys call in and let me know what you think about this. 866-963-2037. We'll listen to that last bit of audio coming into the next break. You guys stay there. We'll be right back with more.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Wildman, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. We still have seats available for our September tours, Washington, D.C. and Williamsburg. Washington, D.C. and Mount Vernon, that's one tour. And then Williamsburg, Jamestown, and Yorktown, that is a separate tour. Now, we put them back to back so you can do both. If you're flying in from Texas or Montana or California or wherever you may be coming from, so that you can do those tours back to back with us if that's something you so choose to do. Now, Stephen McDowell of the Providence Foundation will be with us all along the way as our historian. Stephen will add context, he'll answer questions, talk about the people, the places, the events that make up our early American history. So for more information on this Spiritual Heritage Tour, go to the website spiritualheritagetours.com. spiritualheritagetours.com for the September tour information.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, a generation ago, driving on American roads was much safer than in many other countries with lots of open roads, like Canada or Australia. That is not the case anymore. David Leonhardt reports that our vehicle fatality rate is about 40% higher than the fatality rates in Canada and Australia. He says he was unaware of this country's outlier status until he began to report on the rise of driverless cars. As you might imagine, many people are not convinced that driverless cars will be a good thing for Americans. They aren't convinced they should trust their lives to a computer. I understand that fear, but let's remind ourselves that the current state of driving in America is very dangerous for a number of reasons. First is the problem of speed. Many other countries have lower speed limits, despite the famous German Autobahn. Small differences in speed make a very big difference in potential harm. If we install speed cameras, speeding will decline. A second reason is seatbelts. I was shocked to learn that 1 in 7 American drivers do not use seatbelts. Who are these people? Every time you see a person get into a car on TV or in movies, they put on a seatbelt. Most cars beep at you if you don't put on a seatbelt. A third reason is age. In other countries, 16-year-olds are often not allowed to drive. As you might imagine, teenagers are responsible for a disproportionate number of accidents. Drinking before driving is another problem, especially since many people who drink don't consider buzz driving to actually be drunk driving. And don't forget that people distracted by cell phones often are as dangerous behind the wheel as people who are drunk. Add all these factors up and you can see why driving in America is more dangerous than driving in many other countries. It's time to change our bad habits. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
Decent in Case offers some theories. One, the breakdown of families.
The things that make people want to kill themselves or lose the meaning of life are to do with things like your marriage has never worked out. You know, you don't know your kids anymore.
Social bonds deteriorating. Is that what we're talking about?
Another theory, Americans making a religious migration to churches that Case thinks are changing the way faith connects in the community.
And you've said something really provocative on this. You've singled out the evangelical church.
That is a church that more people are identifying with. And it's a church which encourages my personal relationship with my Savior, but it's a very individual experience. Whereas the mainline Protestant churches or the Catholic Church would be you're part of a community.
We've nothing against the evangelical churches, and we're certainly not correlating the evangelicals with the deaths. So we don't have the data for that. But one of the things you might think if a community is coming apart is you see less religious observance, and you do not.
But there is one correlation they find in the numbers.
All this bad stuff, by and large, is happening to people who do not have a BA. And people who do have a BA are largely exempt from this. The economy is no longer offering a good life to people without a university degree.
People in the U.S. that only have a high school diploma are more than twice as likely to kill themselves as those who hold a college degree. Today, fewer than a third of Americans ultimately earn a bachelor's degree before reaching the age of 29.
Okay, so welcome back to Stacy on the Right. Call-ins are open at 866-963-2037. So, I don't have anything against these two researchers. They obviously seem to care about the topic, and they are delving into it in the hopes of exposing it and maybe drawing some attention to it. The part of the country that they highlighted on their map showing where they just named off some of the states. You're talking about Alaska, but then also like Nevada and Montana and Utah, places like that where whites are committing suicide. They also in the piece went over the fact that blacks of the same age and income groups with the same level of education, meaning no bachelor's degree, are not committing suicide at the same rates. So they're noticing an alarming trend among uneducated whites in this country. Now, you can delve into this more and learn more about this subject by reading Hillbilly Elegy. I talked about this book on the show last summer when we listened to it on the way home from vacation as an audiobook. And it was just a gut-wrenching peek into a part of America that I just have zero interface with. Like, I just don't have any relatives that live in Appalachia. I don't have any kind of connection to it. And so I learned a lot from that. And then there's another book by Charles Murray called Coming Apart that a lot of people have read and a lot of people haven't read because they think that Charles Murray is some kind of a racist because he has these other books that he's written about blacks and IQ, et cetera, et cetera. You can take information from a person where you disagree with some of the things that they have written about, and you can read other research that they've done, and you can listen to it and glean things from it. And that's what I've done with his books. Different books he's read, I agree with. Different ones he's, I totally, utterly disagree with. And the results of what he has shared in some of those books, even though it's statistical data, have not panned out in our lives or people that we know who happen to be black. And so, you have to actually read these books or listen to them on audiobook and then come to your own conclusion. I'm never advocating for you to read a book and say, that's the gospel. Accept the gospel. I mean, the Bible, yeah, I'm advocating that you read that one and believe it all the way through. But the other ones, it's information for you to use to come to your own conclusions. And so you can read Coming Apart and learn about the different stratas of American life and how education does tend to elevate and delineate different groups of people. When you get a certain level of education, it moves you into a certain group of people, and you tend to live near them and interact with them and work with them and go to church with them, et cetera. And it kind of almost defies the normal lines of segregation that exist in our society. But what they're saying, it just bears more thought, and it's interesting. But I want to give they said they don't want to attribute it to evangelicals because they don't have any data on that. There may not be any recent data, as in a study that was just completed last year, but there is data. There's a recent study, and by recent, I mean it was published December of 2004. But, has there been later? Has there been a more updated later study? I don't know. I'd have to go look at Barna Group and see if they have anything. But according to the American Journal of Psychiatry, religious affiliation is associated with significantly lower levels of suicide compared to religiously unaffiliated people, atheists, and agnostics. So are these two economists asserting that evangelicals have a higher suicide rate than unaffiliateds? I don't see how they could assert that unless there's been a radical change in the psyche of evangelical Christians. They have a lower suicide rate according to this. So you got religiously unaffiliated subjects had significantly more lifetime suicide attempts and more first-degree relatives who committed suicide than subjects who endorsed a religious affiliation. Unaffiliated subjects were younger, less often married, less often had children, had less contact with family members. Furthermore, subjects with no religious affiliation perceived fewer reasons for living, particularly fewer moral objections to suicide. In terms of clinical characteristics, religiously unaffiliated subjects had more lifetime impulsivity, aggression, and past substance abuse disorders. No differences in the level of subjective and objective depression, hopelessness, or stressful life events were found. So, in other words, the people who are religiously unaffiliated experience the same level of stress, hopelessness, objective depression, subjective depression. They had all the same kinds of things moving in and out of their sphere, the stressors. The difference is they didn't have as much of a stigma associated with suicide as people who are religiously affiliated. Because if you're religiously affiliated, most religions frown upon suicide. It's a sin, it's, unforgivable, et cetera, et cetera. Conclusions. Religious affiliation is associated with less suicidal behavior in depressed patients. In patients. After other factors were controlled, it was found that greater moral objections to suicide and lower aggression level in religiously affiliated subjects may function as protective factors against suicide attempts. Further study about the influence of religious affiliation on aggressive behavior and how moral objections can reduce the probability of acting on suicidal thoughts may offer new therapeutic strategies in suicide prevention. So Pitzer College sociologist Phil Zuckerman compiled a country-by-country survey, polling and census numbers related to atheism, agnosticism, disbelief in God, and people who say they are non-religious or have no religious preference. These data were published in the chapter titled Atheism, Contemporary Rates and Patterns in the Cambridge Companion to Atheism, edited by Michael Martin, Cambridge University Press. In that book, it said that concerning suicide rates, one indicator of societal health in which religious nations fare better than secular nations. So do you see why I say that it is not comparable? It's not a proper comparison to make to say Americans in these areas, in these states are committing suicide. We don't know why. We think it has something to do with economics and evangelical Christianism, which I don't know where they got that from, except to say that evangelicals are more individual in their faith walks and have less community opportunities, which again, how do these people know that? I go back to my question of our guest yesterday on the program during the first hour when I asked him if he'd ever fired a military grade weapon, and he said no, but he was pontificating about it just moments before as if he was an expert. Never fired one, but he was an expert. Here is a couple that they've never disclosed, as far as I can tell, what their religious affiliation is, but they draw a, very tenuous connection between increases in suicide in whites in a certain number of states in the country that they call the suicide belt. They connect it to evangelical Christianity, but they don't explain whether or not the people who've committed suicide are evangelical Christians. The other thing they don't seem to know is, and I don't know the answer, have they ever attended an evangelical church? Because evangelical churches tend to be larger and more on the mega church side, a lot of people say they have this reputation for not being community oriented, for being so big that you can't really interface with people in the church. Now, it is true. If you go to a church that has about 450 members, you're going to get to know them a lot better, faster. And when they see you, they're going to call you by name and et cetera, et cetera. But we know quite a few people at our large size church. And we've participated in Bible studies and other group activities where you're invited to go on a retreat or do whatever. You pay, you go on the retreat, and you meet other members in the church and you interface with them, and you go on every year you go on the same one. We've done that. We've done a number of different things. The reason I point that out is any church, whether it's huge or small, is only as big as the group of people that you get to know in that church. And the best way to do that is by serving or going into a Bible study or participating in some activity that the church puts on. And we have just hundreds of activities at our church that you can actually choose something and participate in it. And then you get to know the people in that group. So all of that to say, I was watching this and listening to the music because they have the music going in the background. And I was listening to it because I thought this is really concerning. They found a group of Americans who are committing suicide at ever increasing rates, and they're connecting it to economic despair and income inequality. And I should have known right when I heard the word income inequality that they were making spurious connections and drawing fallacious conclusions, to speak in their language. That's what they were doing. So there is no connection that they've been able to demonstrate in their information that they shared on the Wall Street Journal between the suicide belt, white Americans who don't have college degrees committing suicide at higher rates in certain states, and evangelical Christianity. I'm actually kind of surprised that they just leapt onto that, grabbed it, and stuck it in place, when this report that I found shows that Protestants, which they, for some reason, don't consider evangelicals to be Protestants. I don't get that at all. That Protestants actually commit suicide at a higher rate than evangelicals. But even that being said, it's still lower than people who are religiously unaffiliated. So I'm hoping that I'm hoping that I'm sharing this in a way that it makes sense. But I'm concerned that when you have people who have access to the Wall Street Journal, which is a huge publication and still has a sizable reader base, people hear this information. They see the two experts. The one guy is a Nobel Prize winner, the husband. The wife is also well educated. They're both from Princeton. They're putting this information out. It's absolutely not true. And so I'll give you a little bit more data to debunk what they've said. They actually had a report that was last updated 1 March 2005 about assisted suicide. And it was compiled by Derek Humphrey, the former editor of World Right to Die newsletter. And that's something fancy. Imagine being at a party. What do you do? I'm the editor of World Right to Die newsletter. That's got to be a total conversation killer for that guy. So he summarizes the situation in these proportionately more atheist agnostic countries. Again, not like America. Sweden, which is ranked number 1 on the list of countries with the highest proportion of atheists and agnostics, has no law specifically prescribing assisted suicide. Norway, which is ranked number 4, has criminal sanctions against assisted suicide by using the charge accessory to murder. And then Finland is ranked number 7, has nothing in its criminal code about assisted suicide. Sometimes an assister will inform the law enforcement office authorities of him or her having aided someone in dying, and provided the action was justified, in Finland, nothing more happened. Mostly it takes place among friends. So friends help each other commit suicide. Germany is ranked number 11. They have no penalty for suicide or assisted suicide. They've not had a penalty for that since 1751. That was the last time they had a law that penalized that. France is ranked number 8. They don't have specific laws banning assisted suicide, but they could prosecute you under 223-6 of the Penal Code for failure to assist a person who's in danger, but they choose that. Convictions are rare. Punishments are minor. Denver, ranked number 3. No specific law banning assisted suicide. These are European nations. So in these European nations, if you don't want to commit suicide, you could just ask a friend to help you, and that friend would help you commit suicide, and it's not frowned upon. There's no criminal prosecution. And these Princeton economists are trying to compare American society, where it is still a crime in most states, all but I think 1 or 2, to help someone kill themselves. They're trying to compare Americans to Europeans. So these things just don't add up. These are not good comparisons. These words don't mean what I think they think it means. Like it's just not working. And the highest levels of atheism and non-religiousness, again, same countries: Sweden, Vietnam, Denmark, Norway, Japan, Czech Republic, Finland, France, South Korea, Estonia, Germany, Russia, Hungary, the Netherlands, Britain, and Belgium. Highest by level of non-belief, with Sweden being the highest, not apples to apples comparisons in comparison with America. So we are different. And at the end of this report, I can't go through all of it here on the show because we're about to hit the break, but I just want to give you this last little bit here. It says, people who are evangelizing don't knock on doors with a message, hello, if you join our church, you'll be less likely to kill yourself. And it's unlikely that atheists and agnostics will modify their beliefs and religious practices simply because one demographic factor relating to a statistical group they happen to belong to, which is suicide, is negatively trending. But, it just proves that secular nations are not good comparisons for godly ones when it comes to why people are killing themselves. I don't have a degree from Princeton. I was able to figure that out with my computer. Oh well, off we go. We'll be back with more right after these messages.
What does it take to live an uncommon life? Here's former Super Bowl winning coach Tony Dungy with today's uncommon moment.
Too often I hear people say that they will make a difference later, once they've accomplished more, once they have more free time, once the kids are grown and gone. Don't let your age, your experience, or the call of success get in the way of your mission to touch the world for good. You're in a unique place that no one else occupies. Your family, your friends, and your workplace are all spheres of influence. Mentor leaders don't wait. They look for opportunities to get involved in the lives of people. If you pursue mentor leadership, God will ultimately use you for His good. Every platform you have is important in God's eyes.
Tony Dungy, author of the popular Uncommon book series. Discover more at CoachDungy.com. That's CoachDungy.com.
Coming next week on The Dwelling Place. Pastor Al Pittman continues to walk us through the Bible, line by line and verse by verse, to let God show us just how timeless His truth is. That's next week on The Dwelling Place.
It's time for truth to be unveiled. It's time to get back to God with Pastor Dexter Sanders on Urban Family Talk. Awakening and empowering everyday people to impact the world. The Back to God radio show is coming to Urban Family Talk. Discovering who we are and whose we are. Beginning Monday, March 12th. Join Pastor D and get back to God.
The beauty of possibility. Every human life so irreplaceable. I can't imagine life without you. It's just unthinkable. There's no one like you. No one like you. You're 1 in 7 billion. There's no one like you, no one like you. You're 1 in 7 billion.
We are all created by God with undeniable purpose. Learn more about beautiful possibility at www.radiance.life. Follow us on Twitter at Life Has Purpose.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right.
CNN is a dishonest network. They say they cover the news, they don't. They have an agenda all day long. They fit the news into their left-wing agenda, anti-Trump agenda. That's what they do. Every show, every hour, every day. I don't feel sorry for them. They're corrupt. But would they do something like that overt, with a kid? No. And they didn't.
That's Bill O'Reilly. He's got a new TV show over at Newsmax TV. So he's back on the airwaves again. And he had quite a little statement there about CNN. He doesn't feel like they're a legitimate news organization anymore. And I have to say, with some of the things that they're peddling on the gun control thing, they're not sending their best. What did President Trump say about the country of Mexico? He said they're not sending their best people. I think the liberals are not putting their best people forward when it comes to discussing their so-called desire for gun control. And the reason I say that is because the gun ownership transcends all socioeconomic and political affiliations and racial barriers, all of that. People who want to own guns to protect themselves, they own them. They protect themselves with them. And they don't say, well, I want to protect myself and I'm not afraid of guns, but I'm a Democrat, so I'm not going to do it. They just do what they feel like they need to do. And that means they have some people on their side who are Democrats who own guns, who could come on and actually talk about AR-15s. I'd like to say, for the record, for the podcast, AR stands for Armalite rifle, the original maker of that particular lower, which is slang for the receiver, and that style of rifle. It's the AR-10, now it's the AR-15. That does not stand for assault rifle. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. And if you're out there peddling that, please stop. Please stop saying that, because it's not true. And it's easy to find out what it really means. So there's a bunch of different things out there that are being said that these things are not true. They're easily debunked. And I had a really neat note sent over to me on the Facebook page. And I won't say her whole name. Stephanie is her name. And she sent me this cute little primer. And it's most of this stuff I already knew, but it's always good to refresh. That's the joy of information. You can store it away in your memory banks, and sometimes you can pull in and access it immediately. And other times you're like, I just don't remember that. And then a friend will send you a quick little note. And so she says she's tired of hearing and seeing firearms terms used incorrectly and carelessly everywhere. So she developed a quick little short list, and it's really, really good. But let's just listen to these terms and definitions. And why am I sharing them? Because you can actually choose to clip out this little bit on YouTube. If you go to my YouTube page, Stacy on the Right, you can get this live stream and you can start and end the video at a certain section and then share the link for that particular segment, which would be this one. And you can share it with someone who maybe is using some terms incorrectly, and they might be a great person, but they've just been misinformed. Maybe they watch CNN and so they don't have good info. So here you go. An automatic firearm is one that continuously fires rounds as long as the trigger is pressed or held and there is ammunition in the magazine or chamber. Okay? So that's an automatic weapon, and those are not readily available in the market. If you want one, you have to pay for a tax stamp and apply to the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, ATF, for basically it's a registration. And then it takes 12 to 18 months to get an approval back. And you have to buy an automatic weapon that was produced before a certain year, because they are not making new automatic weapons for sale to the public. Military grade, we'll get there. Machine gun. A machine gun is a fully automatic, mounted or portable firearm designed to fire bullets in quick succession from an ammunition belt or magazine, typically at a rate of 300 to 1,800 rounds per minute. It is a type of automatic firearm. So that's a machine gun. For the purposes of the National Firearms Act, enacted in 1934, the term machine gun means any weapon which shoots, is designed to shoot, or can be readily restored to shoot automatically more than one shot without manual reloading by a single function of the trigger. This is where the term clip and magazine come in. You'll hear someone say he had a 30 clip. He had a clip of 30 magazines or 30 rounds. Well, first of all, clips and magazines are totally different. The magazine is that plastic case that holds 10 or 20 or 30, or, you can get extended ones for even more than that. It's made of plastic. You load the bullets into it, and then that's what clicks up into the firearm that gives the ability to store more bullets than, say, a regular pistol. And a pistol can hold up to, I think, 15. But it depends on what kind it is. Because again, we're not just talking about there as many coffee makers as there are. Do you think people use ubiquitous terms and get them mixed up? You should see the way the baristas argue about coffee makers and coffee online on YouTube channels. And then you'll understand how ridiculous it is for people who don't know anything about firearms to discuss them without first reading a primer and then looking at the guns themselves and maybe even shooting them so they can understand the difference. So then the Firearm Owners Protection Act of 1986 bans the possession and transfer of new machine guns. Did you hear what I said? So it's the Firearm Owners Protection Act of 1986, which bans the possession and transfer of new machine guns. The law exempts machine guns manufactured prior to May 19th, 1986, as well as machine guns possessed by or manufactured for governmental entities like the military. Privately owned machine guns manufactured prior to that date are required to be registered with the ATF. So there are people in America who own machine guns that were manufactured prior to May 19th of 1986. Those firearms are required to be registered by law with the ATF, but they are still allowed to possess them. So if someone says to you, machine guns are illegal or automatic firearms are illegal, they don't know what they're talking about. If you have one that was manufactured prior to 1986 and it's registered with the ATF, it is not only legal, you have done all that needs to be done in order to possess that firearm. Assault weapons. Now, this one is really important because assault weapon really means nothing. Check my Twitter feed. I tweeted out a picture of two guns. One of them is the one that the liberals never pay attention to, and it fires the exact same ammunition and frequency, rate of speed of fire when you pull the trigger as an AR-15. They want to ban the AR-15, but they think by banning the AR-15, they can stop shootings that have the same lethality. And this other gun is not an AR-15, but it does exactly the same thing. Just doesn't look as scary because it doesn't have a hand grip and it's not black. It's made of wood. Check my Twitter feed. So assault weapons have an actual definition. The 1994 federal assault weapon ban, which expired on September 13th of 2004, codified a definition of an assault weapon as a rifle type of assault weapon that is semi-automatic with the ability to accept a detachable magazine and two or more of the following. So if it's semi-automatic and a rifle, and it only has a folding stock, then it's not an assault weapon. If it has a folding and telescoping stock, then it's an assault weapon. Do you hear the, I'm not going to get riled up at the end of the show. The very term assault weapons was created for the purposes of banning what it defined. The ban based on cosmetics only prohibited certain external features on certain guns that Democrats want to eliminate. And a certain number of guns were banned outright, but the number of those types of guns were less than 20. And you best believe that whatever was banned, something very much like it was immediately created and manufactured under a different name. Because, as I said yesterday, the problem is not access. Access is there. The access exists and will exist. There is no eliminating it because the guns are already out there in the space being the United States. The guns already exist. They've already been manufactured, and the means for manufacturing more exists. And the illegal gun market exists. So even when you ban a certain type of weapon, all of the weapons of that type that were in existence are still in the space and can still be traded outside of the legal apparatus or method so that people can still access them. So there is no getting rid of or banning. You can pass all the laws you want, and law-abiding people will follow them, and lawbreakers will simply go to other access points and get the guns. That's it. And for people who really have hate in their hearts, who are bent on destroying the lives of others, they don't need guns to do it. There are so many other ways. Look at ISIS sending attackers into the U.S. to use box trucks to kill people. They've been doing it in Europe. They've now done it in New York City. if someone wants to kill, they'll use whatever means they feel is at their disposal. And it's easier to rent a box truck than it is to purchase a firearm. So I'm sharing this. And I just want to say thanks so much to Stephanie again. I knew a bunch of these. I always forget the dates, the specific dates for the National Firearms Act and the Firearms Owners Protection Act. I always forget the dates on those, but I have read that information before. But the reason why it's so important to share it and to be aware of it is that, again, it's good information to have, but it doesn't change situations like Nicholas Cruz or the guy who shot up the Pulse nightclub or the San Bernardino shooter. These shootings, well, first of all, raising the age limit, it wouldn't have stopped the Pulse nightclub killer or the San Bernardino killers. A number of these killers are in their 60s. The guy who shot up the concert in Las Vegas, he was in his 60s. So what would a gun restriction have done for him? Someone said, well, if we banned bump stocks, he wouldn't have had one. But bump stocks are made of plastic, so any 3D printer can create a bump stock. And there are YouTube videos of people who say they don't even use bump stocks to increase the rate of fire. They just position the firearm in a certain way and use a certain method of firing that gives them almost the same velocity, the same rate of fire as a automatic weapon with a semi-automatic. And then what no one is talking about is the fact that most weapons, if you know what you're doing, and I don't mean you're a professional gunsmith, I mean you have access to YouTube and you've watched a couple of videos, you can turn a semi-automatic weapon into an automatic weapon. It can be done. So why are we talking about banning things? Why are we talking about trying to change the tools instead of changing the people? Liberals want you to think people can't change, that we can't change our nation, that we can't reorient ourselves to a more moral center, and that we can't have more people who are religious, that we have to follow the path of Europe. That's why they like to refer to Europe so much, because to them, that's the utopia. Most people are unchurched. Most people don't believe in God. Suicide rates are high, but who cares? No one's talking about it. No one even mentions it. That's what they think is a utopia. We don't have to go down that road. The choice is ours to make. We can go down that road for sure. Or we can push back against these liberals and tell them, you know what, your ideas stink. If you like Europe, go live there. I lived there. I loved it, but I was an American citizen. It's amazing what living on an American base with an American ID card and speaking English, the King's English, if you will, what it can do for you living in Europe. You're there. You're enjoying all the old buildings and the verdant green pastures and all of the European culture. But at any moment, you can hop on a plane, flash your passport, and you're back in America, and you never have to go back to Europe again. Now, I love Europe, and I love going there. But what I'm saying is I wasn't a citizen of Europe. I wasn't a German citizen or a French citizen. I was an American the whole time. It makes a huge difference. So, and that's the part about liberalism that we really have to come to understand. You have to understand that liberals want to idolize countries that they would never live in. Look how they talk about Mexico and people who come from there. They come here out of love. But when they get mad at our government, they don't like who's been elected president, they say they're moving to Canada. Have you noticed that? Ask any liberal that you know who thinks that Cuba is a fantastic place, and then ask them, well, you could be an expat there. You could move there. Why don't you? Why don't you go live in Cuba if it's so fantastic? If you really like the Castro family, why don't you go live in Cuba? Watch what they say. They never have a good answer for that. If they only had one plane ticket and it could only go to one of two places, and one of those places was Switzerland, which has an almost 100% gun ownership rate, and I don't know, Syria, which of those two countries do you think a liberal would choose? They only get to choose one and they have to fly out. They can't stay here. They're not choosing Syria. They idolize countries that are war-torn and backward, but they won't go live there because it's easy to have stupid ideas that don't work when you're living in a capitalistic, free-thinking, constitutionally guaranteed rights country. Bank on it. All right, we'll be back with more tomorrow. God bless. Have a great night.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast do not necessarily reflect those of Urban Family Talk, Urban Family Communications, or American Family Association.